COVID is the ultimate canceller. Since so many people absolutely hate cancel culture, I guess I understand why so many people hate COVID. On top of killing a lot of people, it also killed a lot of fun. Gamers are one of the major victims to COVID's fun ruining. Gamers have been impacted in lots of negative ways from the pandemic, but like many bad things, it has a few good sides as well. So, first, do you want to hear the good news or the bad news? Let's go with the bad news first. Obviously by bad news I just mean the effects of COVID-19 on gamers. Well, obviously the first bad thing that happened to people was the canceling of gaming events because of the pandemic. As soon as the virus became a big deal, many gaming events were cancelled. The first thing that people were very disappointed in was the cancelling of E3 2020. The in-person part of E3 is an extremely integral part of E3, so I'm sure that many people that were planning to go were very disappointed that they couldn't see any in-person press conferences that they were planning on going to. For many, this was disappointing, but also some didn't care. Two of the three biggest companies that normally do E3, Nintendo and Sony, were completely unaffected by the news. Nintendo ended up doing their Nintendo Direct, it just wasn't connected to E3, and Sony wasn't even planning on doing E3 that year, so lots of people weren't even affected by the lack of an E3 showcase. For the other companies like Microsoft, they likely just announced their games separately from a press conference, so mostly the issue for no E3 was the lack of an in-person event. After E3 was supposed to be EVO 2020. EVO, along with other similar fighting game tournaments, were cancelled and were mostly held in online tournaments. Online tournaments are unanimously considered to be much inferior, as there can be delay in online matches or rollback netcode issues if rollback netcode is in use. Plus, crowds make the tournament experience much better in general, which is why fighting game communities took huge hits during the pandemic. In EVO's case, even the online tournament never happened because of sexual assault allegations against the co-founder and organizer of EVO. Another important convention that was cancelled was PAX. All of the PAX conventions were cancelled in 2020 after the pandemic broke out. This one sucked for me as I went to a PAX convention in 2019 and I wanted to go back in 2020. PAX was cancelled all the way through the middle of 2021. PAX is planning on finally having an in-person PAX event for PAX West in September 2021, and only time will tell if that will really happen, or if it gets cancelled again. These conventions I mentioned are only a fraction of the gaming events that were cancelled. Many more were cancelled beyond my personal circle of conventions that I follow, like Minecon, TwitchCon, BlizzCon, Comic-Con, and much more. Conventions being cancelled sucks, but it's not a game breaker. It's more of a that sucks thing, but it doesn't affect all gamers. Something that does affect all gamers is the fact that games production has gone down drastically. This problem happened especially during the beginning of the pandemic, where game companies were trying to figure out the online working situation. Even when they did figure things out, people were much less productive, as people were working from home, and people work much worse at home than they do at school. Pretty much any game in production during the virus was pushed back at least a year. This was extremely frustrating for a huge amount of people, and was probably the worst impact the virus had on the gaming industry. Here's just a few games that were pushed back because of COVID. Ghostwire Tokyo, Halo Infinite, Kerbal Space Program, and Ghost of Tsushima. Not only were the releases of the games delayed, but also game updates were affected. Minecraft, Fortnite, and Cuphead are some games that I can think of right now, but pretty much any game with active updates were affected negatively by later release dates. Companies that prefer quality over quantity were especially impacted. Companies like Nintendo, who pride themselves on the quality of their games, most likely had delays greater than game companies that try to rush games. Nintendo said during the pandemic, "Please be aware that the impact on game development in terms of both hardware and software may potentially increase as the amount of time spent working remotely increases." On top of that, one of the most important game designers at Nintendo, Shigeru Miyamoto, has a famous quote about rushing games, saying, "A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad." Likely, a company largely popularized and pioneered by Shigeru Miyamoto would have these values for their company, which would push game releases back a lot. Japan was also especially impacted by the pandemic, as they were more used to a traditional approach to work, so switching to online work was more difficult in Japan. Because Japan is such an important company for game production, numerous games were pushed back even further than they could have been. Game production wasn't the only gaming product slowed down during the pandemic. but also console production. The Nintendo Switch console production in Vietnam reduced hugely as a result of less parts being shipped from China during quarantine. This likely affected Microsoft and Sony similarly to Nintendo. Since people couldn't go to stores, shopping for consoles became mostly online. This became an absolutely huge issue. The PlayStation 5 was released in November of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. Shopping was mostly online for purchasing the console, which was a big issue because of the highly exploitable purchasing system. People use bots to instantly purchase as many consoles as they can, and try to resell them for a profit, which is called scalping. Scalping plus a lack of stock due to COVID have caused many people to not be able to purchase a PS5 for themselves, which is a big disappointment to people who are looking forward to playing on a PS5. Although all of these negatives have existed thanks to COVID, there were a few things for gamers that could be considered positive. Since so many people were trapped in their house, people had a lot more time to do things like playing video games. The first big game that came out during quarantine was Animal Crossing: New Horizons for the Nintendo Switch. This game came out in March 2020, which was when the mass quarantining started. Animal Crossing was mostly popular because you can sink huge amounts of hours into customizing your new personal island. It has daily activities, a main pathway or story for people who want to do that, and customization for people who want to go beyond just beating the main story. The game allows you to play the way you want to, whether it's in short bursts or long. After creating your island, you can visit other people's islands, which simulates hanging out in real life. This game came out at the absolute perfect time as people were feeling separated from their friends and wanted a way to connect with them. And it was also a game gamers could sink tons of hours in with all the time they had on their hands. Also, a large amount of streamers would play the game, so that greatly helped with the popularity of the game. As of March 31st, 2021, New Horizons sold 32.63 million copies, quickly making it the second best-selling game on the Nintendo Switch, above games like Smash and Breath of the Wild. The next game that exploded during the pandemic was Fall Guys. Fall Guys was a battle royale game that featured several different mini-games to compete against other people. The main selling point of the game was that you could play with your friends against other people across the world. The game was very fun and extremely popular, and it peaked in popularity in August of 2020. The next game that blew up in quarantine was Among Us. The game was another example of a social game. The game features a certain number of up to 15 players with a certain number of imposters trying to slowly kill everybody without being caught. It seems like most games that were big during COVID were social games, and Among Us is no exception. The game was released in 2018 but had little to no traction at first, but the game slowly grew and finally exploded in 2020. The game peaked in October of 2020 and was insanely popular among streamers and YouTubers. Minecraft was also very big during quarantine, with YouTubers like Dream becoming extremely big during the pandemic. I think it's no doubt that video games had hugely positive effects on gamers during the pandemic, as it provided socialization that many people needed badly. Coronavirus has caused many people unhappiness in many different ways, including in the game industry, but there were at least a few positives that came with it, like a thriving gaming industry and being able to play new games that will provide many positive memories for the future. The pandemic isn't yet over, but now that many countries are getting a handle on it, it's about time for gamers to say goodbye to the life they've gotten used to for about a year and a half. Whether that's for better or for worse. Probably for the better, but maybe not for everyone. Okay, goodbye. See you in the next upload. I may have to postpone my next video because I'm about to go on a week-long trip and I have 4 days to make 2 whole videos while I also have other stuff going on right now. So we'll see if I'm able to do that. If you see an upload next Tuesday, then you'll know that I went through pain for that. Alright, goodbye.